Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, this is yours truly, attorney Michael Cord, aka Michael X, aka the angriest black man in America. And today's episode of TV Courtroom, and I know I say this all the time, is the best one. Each time I do one, I say this is the best one until the next one, and the next one. But I got to tell you, this is really, really enlightening and informative and inspirational. And I haven't said anything about the show yet, but I will right now. Um, I'm going to be talking exclusively about Attack, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. You see, Roland, our producer, our engineer extraordinary, has it right up there. And it says it all. If you want to contact us and get more information, email us at atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. That's atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. At the bottom of what you see on the screen, thanks to Roland, is our new and revised and updated website. Go to it. Go to it now. Avengingtheancestors.com. That's avengingtheancestors.com, and you'll find out every single thing you need to know about Attack. And very quickly, today is primarily going to be about the legal updates, the litigation updates, the federal court updates, because people want to know what's going on. They know that there was a mega lawsuit that was filed back on January 22 of 2026. They know that there was decision in our favor and on behalf of the city law department, thanks to the Honorable Mayor Sherelle Parker. They know that happened. They know that the federal government then filed an appeal when we won in district court. And you start off in federal district court, there was a Republican appointed federal court judge by the name of District Justice Cynthia Rufe, RUFE. And she heard the arguments from the city law department, heard the arguments from our legal team. That's a tax legal team, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And that Republican judge ruled in our favor against the Republican MAGA administration. Happy day, we won. We're going to talk more about that later. And then the federal government decided to appeal and went from the federal district court, where Judge Roof is, up to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where the case stands now. We, meaning Attack, along with a group called the Black Journey. And if you're not familiar with the Black Journey, you need to do so, because if you want to know about a Black woman owned and operated historical tour guide company focusing on Black history in Philadelphia, you need to find out more about the Black Journey, and you will, because one of the tour guides from the Black Journey will be on the show today at about 4:05 p.m. That's our second guest. Our first guest will be one of the most prominent attorneys and legal academics in Philadelphia today, Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire. Who is Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire? I'll introduce her in just a few minutes when we bring her up at 3:40. But suffice it to say, if you want a top academic scholar, if you want a top litigation attorney, then you put them together and you have Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire, who is the lead counsel, the lead attorney for Attack, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, and also lead attorney for the group I just mentioned, the Black Journey. And Professor McClellan is going to tell us exactly what happened in district court and exactly what's scheduled to happen in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and let us know if there's any chance, probability, uncertainty, likelihood, whatever the case might be, of the case going from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, where it is, up to the U.S. Supreme Court. When I have Professor McClellan on, she's going to talk about something called a motion to intervene. That's one of the most powerful legal filings I've ever seen in my life when it comes to Black people. It's 112 pages long, and you got to get it and you got to read it. When Professor McClellan comes on in about 5 or 6 minutes, she's going to talk about it, what it is, what it does, and what we're trying to do. That's going to go from 3:40 till about 4 o'clock. And then from 4:05 until about 4:15. Once again, from 4:05 for 10 minutes or so to about 4:15. You'll hear from Mijuel K. Johnson, a tour guide who's part of the Black Journey. He's going to talk to us about a more youthful approach to activism and what we can do to make this thing go forward. But before we hear from, in just a couple minutes, Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire, let me just tell you a few dates and times of stuff that you need to know about. And some other quick announcements. I'll do that within the next 5 minutes, starting now. You got to attend ATTAC's next meeting. ATTAC, we don't really have meetings anymore. We have mega town hall gatherings, and they're so big that we actually have to do it by Zoom. Periodically and historically, we've met at Zion Baptist Church, Broad and Venango, each month, once a month. And we're going to still do that. But because we've gotten so many people, in addition to our hardcore group, but even more folks, it's easier if we just hold Zoom meetings. Really, not just Zoom meetings, but they're really town hall mega gatherings because they're that well attended. Write this down, folks. The next ATTAC meeting, we normally meet on the first Monday of every month. That would take us to April 6th. However, based on some announcements that we need to include in our next meeting, we decided it would be much more effective if we did it on Tuesday, April 7th. That's Tuesday, April 7th. So before we get to our guest in about 3 minutes, write this down. The next ATTAC town hall mega, not MAGA, mega meeting will take place on Tuesday, April 7th, 6:30 p.m. via Zoom. And how do you get the Zoom link? You must send us an email and we'll respond with the link. You can't just log on. You have to contact us for the Tuesday, April 7th, 6:30 p.m. ATTAC meeting, as Roland, our engineer, our producer, has shown there. And if you want that link, you got to email us. Send an email to atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. That's ATAC right at the top in blue. ATAC.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com and say, yo, I heard Michael X on TV Courtroom saying we can get the link to the Zoom meeting, Zoom town hall taking place on Tuesday, April 7th at 6:30 p.m. And that's how you get it. Email us, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. And we've had a website. We've been in existence for nearly a quarter century, almost 25 years. We've actually existed from 2002 to 2026. Do the math. That's 24 years. And about maybe 12, 13 years ago, maybe a little more, 15 years ago, we got a website, but it was a very basic, unimpressive, boring website. And we decided to come up to more modern day times. And we got a young man, a student, a graduate student at Drexel University, who's a webmaster. And when I say master, that's the key word, because this brother put together a thoroughly impressive website. You want to see the bells and whistles and the new stuff we have? Go to our newly updated website, avengingtheancestors.com. That's avengingtheancestors.com. Once you go to that website, you'll see and hear everything you need to see and hear. Included will be newspaper articles and correspondence we started back in 2002, almost a quarter century ago. So we've been around for a while fighting the good fight. Once again, that website, avengingtheancestors.com. Also included on that website is an article I wrote back in 2005. There's a scholarly publication here in Pennsylvania called the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. That's Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. And they asked me to write about Sixth and Market, to write about the President's House, to write about the Slavery Memorial, which is what I did. That article, that scholarly article, about 15 pages or so, is included on that website, which is avengingtheancestors.com. So in order to find out more about ATTAC, go to our website, avengingtheancestors.com, to get a Zoom link for our upcoming meeting, which is going to take place on Tuesday, April 7th, 6:30 p.m. You must contact us by the end of Sunday. Sunday is the 5th. If you don't get to us by midnight going into that Monday, again, that would be, let's just say this, by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, which happens to be April 5th, you must notify us and say you want a Zoom link. Do that by emailing us at atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. We'll get that Zoom link to you. I got more to share with you, but let's get to the star of the show. I mentioned earlier in the show that we're going to have two guests, one at 3:40 for about 15 minutes, another for about 10 minutes at 4:05. So we're going to start now with our first guest, Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire. And let me just say a little bit about her because she's modest, she's humble. She doesn't want me to brag about her, but I'm going to do it anyway. Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire, is the founding director and professor of the Advocacy for Racial and Civil Justice Clinic at Penn Law, known as ARC, A-R-C. She also worked as legal counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She's a scholar and a gentlewoman who has written numerous law review articles. I didn't know this until recently. Also holds a master's degree in education from Penn, graduated from Yale Law School, and served as a federal judicial law clerk. If I read all of my notes about her, we'd be here until 7 p.m. So without further ado, the lead counsel for Avenging the Ancestors Coalition and the Black Journey, Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire. How are you today?
Hi, Michael. It's so wonderful to be with you, and thank you for that generous introduction. You'll appreciate when I say that my the degree I'm most proud of is from Central High School, and I know as a Masterman grad,
Whoa.
You will laugh at that.
It's absolutely perfect. People see all that other stuff, but they need to know where it started. So yes, absolutely. So Cara, do you mind if we call you Cara, or should we call you the Honorable Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire?
Please call me Cara, Attorney Cord.
I appreciate that. You can call me Michael. Having said that, first, and I did cover much of it, if you can spend 10, 20 seconds kind of filling in the gaps before you talk about where this case stands. I just want people to know who you are and what you've done to put you in the perfect position to be where you are now as our attorney. So a little bit more background information. We talked about Central. We talked about Yale. Anything else that should be stated before we get into the topic?
Well, I'll just say I have been honored in my short career to have really phenomenal clients. And so when I was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, I had the chance to represent folks who were protesting and really everyday residents in West Philadelphia who happened to be around on the day that police tear gassed West Philadelphia in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And that was when I initially got to know you, Michael, because I know you were also doing protest representation. But really, I would say, if anything, that I've had the honor of representing tremendous people who have spoken up in the face of injustice. And to me, this case is a continuation of that. Representing Avenging the Ancestors is truly the honor of my career. So I'm glad to be here.
And we're glad to have you. Talk a little bit about ARC. And one of the things that really impressed me about you, Cara, when we began to talk about you representing ATTAC, you have almost a fixation about representing grassroots organizations. Why is that?
So the clinic that I direct, it's called Advocacy for Racial and Civil Justice Clinic at Penn Law School. It is a model that's focused on training students not just to be impact litigators, but to use a movement lawyering approach. So we take on civil rights issues that are often complex or that are setting new precedent, but we only take on cases when a grassroots organization has come to us and said, look, we are working towards this systemic change, and then we really partner with them to figure out, is there a legal strategy that can collaborate the movement work that's going on? And so it's really important to me from a pedagogical standpoint that I am teaching students not just to sit in the ivory tower coming up with different ideas of, so-called test cases, but to be in community and in constant communication and in conversation with people who are directly impacted. Because as we know, people who are closest to the pain are the ones who have the solutions, are the ones who have the vision for what needs to change.
Very well said. Those of you who just tuned in, were listening to Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire, who wants us to call her Cara, so we'll just call her Cara, explaining what she does. Speaking of what you do, for those who know nothing about this federal case, let me just spend 30 seconds saying this. Since 2002, and that's 24 years ago, ATTACK was founded. And for 8 solid years, we fought the good fight for what took place on December 15, 2010. That was the grand opening of the first, I repeat, the first slavery memorial of its kind on federal property in the history of the United States of America. And we all know that George Washington enslaved 316 black men, women, and children at his Mount Vernon, Virginia plantation, and held 9 of them right here in Philadelphia, and did so illegally. So we were able to fight that good fight for 8 years, 2002 to 2010. Everything was great until it wasn't. And it wasn't 15 years later when the guy in the White House took some action. I'm going to turn it over to Cara now. Tell us what happened, Cara, what was done by the federal government, and then about the litigation to get us where we are now with the major announcement regarding this motion to intervene. But start us on January 22, 2026, when the guy in the White House sent those men to desecrate the site.
Well, if I could start just even a little bit before that, in March
Yes.
2025, when President Trump issued Executive Order 14253, restoring truth and sanity to American history, as it is called, which claims to identify examples of where there is, in the president's word, divisive discussions of American history, or where there is, in the language of the order, an attempt to critique our American historical figures. And so through that language, the secretarial order then tries to implement this executive order. And it was through the reporting about the executive order over the summer that we first learned that the president's house had been identified for potential removal as a result of this order. And again, the idea was that discussing the history of slavery was somehow divisive. And when you look at the different exhibits and educational materials throughout National Park Service that have been identified for removal, a common theme is that they discuss slavery. Disproportionately, on the list of things that were identified for removal, you see either discussions of Black history generally, right? So we see information about Polly Murray was identified for removal. The story of Medgar Evers was identified for removal. More generally, when you look at the changes that have happened to National Park Service in terms of the removal of a website that discussed Harriet Tubman and her legacy as an abolitionist. In addition to that, this is at the same time that we see the president really trying to glorify different American historical figures who owned slaves as heroic, despite that past. And so when we learned that the president's house site, which you have already identified, Michael, the long history of work between grassroots organizations, ATTACK really at the lead, the National Park Service, the city of Philadelphia, collaboratively, after this history was discovered of President George Washington owning 9 people who he held in slavery at the president's house, the executive mansion. I mean, just to put into full picture for everyone who's listening, the paradox of our colonial history at a time when Independence Hall is right around the corner, where the Declaration of Independence had just been adopted, right? The words, all men are created equal, where the Constitution was debated and ratified, all at Independence Hall. And just around the corner in the executive mansion in Philadelphia, President George Washington was holding people in slavery. And not just holding people in slavery, they were attempting to escape. And when we think about the history of Ona Judge, he was using the power of the federal government to try to track her down and bring her back to being held in slavery and toiling at the executive mansion. So when that history is discovered through historical research in 2001, and then later further discovered through archaeology, attack, and other grassroots organizations pushed the National Park Service to say you have to recognize this history. When people step out of the new Liberty Bell, right in front of their feet is going to be the executive mansion where President George Washington held 9 people in slavery. To not acknowledge that is a dishonest representation of the historical record of our country. And so successfully, right, attack pushes National Park Service, the city of Philadelphia, to acknowledge this history, and what we see is a very deliberative, thoughtful process of how to do so. And despite all of the time and work that was put in, as you already acknowledged, between really the discovery in the early 2000s and in 2010, the site opening, and all of the acclaim that it received in the years since, right, with people visiting the site, learning so much, discussing how this changed their outlook and their view and their understanding of our colonial history. And right on the eve of the 250th anniversary of our country, when people across the world are coming to really reflect and learn about this history, we have National Park Service coming in with crowbars, removing this site entirely. And I say all that because to understand our legal claims, right, it's first a claim that this is a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, which there are governing statutes under the National Historic Preservation Act and the Organic Act that talk about how the National Park Service has a duty to maintain our history and protect the historical record, but also the process that should be followed when there's going to be a change to a park exhibit or to the materials that exist within parks. That is this kind of really, I think it's clear, fundamental change when you think about the purpose of the exhibit. And so the claims that we bring under the APA talk about the violation of these statutes and really the reality that this was an arbitrary and capricious decision. It wasn't the thoughtful, right, 9-year deliberative process that went into the creation of the exhibit. It's the opposite of that in terms of people showing up in the afternoon from National Park Service and Department of Interior and just with crowbars removing this material in one fell swoop. And then I can pause there, but I just want to mention this, the second kind of bucket of claims in the lawsuit, which is we argue that this was an equal protection component of the Fifth Amendment violation because it was discriminatory. And I'm happy to talk more about that too.
I certainly would love for you to do that. Let me play the devil's advocate. In this case, I literally mean the devil's advocate. Hey, we're the federal government. That's our property. We can do with it what we will. What's the response?
Well, it's not true that the government can literally at will make fundamental changes to a site like this, right? That's what the Administrative Procedure Act ensures, that there's not this type of arbitrary decision making that is not reasoned and is not deliberative when we're talking about our national historic resources. So sure, it's true that changes can be made by the federal government, but not just without following proper process and procedure. And then the second piece, and then this gets to our equal protection claims, is it's certainly not the case that the government can use the fact that it is being done through the National Park Service or Department of Interior or really any federal agency as a cover for acting on the basis of animus, right? It's not like you can hide behind the Administrative Procedure Act to cover up decisions that are completely lacking of reason and arbitrary because they are actually racist. And so we argue that the decision to remove this exhibit was really a pretext for discrimination. Like the real reason was a concern not about corrosive ideology or divisive ideology, but about wanting and pursuing this agenda of removing and erasing discussions of the history of slavery and a more general project to remove honest discussions of Black history, which we know is critical to telling the full story of American history.
Those of you who are tuned in, you're listening to and watching Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire, founding director and professor of the Advocacy for Racial and Civic Justice Clinic at Penn Law, and in regard to this discussion, chief legal counsel for Attack and the Black Journey. Let's go back to what you said about the equal protection. I want you to expand upon that. But for those who don't understand, and I'm so glad you started with the executive order from the president in March, and then we get to May with the directive from the Interior Department. But for those who don't know, what's the difference between the claims raised by you slash us and what the city did? And if they're so similar, why is there a need to take this recent action? The first thing for those who want to know, what is the city arguing that's different from what we're arguing?
Sure. So I have to acknowledge this is part of why it was critical also for us to co-counsel this case with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, because they bring such storied expertise in terms of litigating equal protection claims and pushing for the rights of Black people. And so in this case, we felt it was critical that Avenging the Ancestors Coalition and the Black Journey be a full party in the lawsuit. And that's why we filed this motion to intervene this week. And so the motion says that both the Black Journey and Avenging the Ancestors Coalition have unique interests in the outcome of this case and have been uniquely harmed by the removal of the President's House Slavery Memorial exhibit, because both organizations rely on the exhibit. Avenging the Ancestors, and Michael, you can speak to this even obviously much better than me, but uses the exhibit to educate the public, to connect directly with the ancestors in terms of returning to the exhibit throughout the year, to hold gatherings and to remember this history. The Black Journey regularly uses the site as part of their tours. In fact, the Black Journey chooses to start its tours at the President's House Slavery Memorial. And for the tours that don't start there, it's true that the tours in general have been developed in this part of the city and around the site because this is such a critical site for telling Black history. Again, when you think about the import of this site as where the president, the first president of the United States, held people in slavery, 9 individuals. In many ways, it's just a microcosm for thinking about the paradox of our country's founding values in terms of liberty and freedom, and the reality that slavery was foundational and at the core of building this country as well. And so that's why the site is so critical for the Black Journey and for its tours. But to get to your question, we felt that the interests of these organizations must be central to this case and brought as full parties. And that's why we moved to intervene. And the claims that Black Journey and Attack are able to bring are different from what the city is able to bring because the interests of these organizations are different, right? And so the city's claims are under the APA, and there's also an ultra-virus claim, but they're focused on the agreement that the city had with National Park Service, developing the site as a really collaborative process, and this removal as a violation of the core purpose of the site in those agreements. And so the city brings arguments that that the decision wasn't reasoned and the process wasn't followed that should have been followed, and that it has upset the entire purpose of what this exhibit was about. But Attack and Avenging the Ancestors can bring slightly different arguments because, again, it's not just that this was an arbitrary process, but it's also that the reasons for the removal were discriminatory. And while the city can make many arguments, it's essential that Black people are directly represented in this case and that their voices are heard. And, because we can really speak differently to the reality that, yes, removing the discussion of slavery and Black history harms all Americans, but there is a unique harm to us as Black people. And that has to do with the fact that not telling our history is a way of reinforcing white supremacy, and erasing our history is a unique harm to us as people, just to be really explicit, who are the descendants of slaves who have had our history stolen and our connection to our ancestors stolen from us before, right? That is part of the reason that it's so critical that we have responded, really by advocating for our history. It's a form of our resilience. And so to have our history stolen from us again is really a compounding harm when you think about the larger story of the experience of us as people who are descendants of slaves in this country.
I'm so glad you broke it down the way you did. Those who are watching me can see with my right shoulder Malcolm X. And Brother Malcolm would always talk about making it plain. And you just took some convoluted, esoteric legal concepts and made them plain. We certainly appreciate that. Having said that, walk us through, if you would, Cara, what happened procedurally in this? Because there was the initial claim by the city. Talk to us about what sparked it. Then there was the amici by you on behalf of the Black Journey attack. And then we got the federal court. And now we're in Third Circuit. And this past Wednesday, which would have been April 1, that's when this motion to intervene was filed. So just walk us through it chronologically, beginning with the city's filing, and explain to folks where we are now and where we're headed.
Yeah, I think this is a case that's going to be studied by law students for a long time because it's so procedurally complicated. So bear with me. January 22nd, the removal happens. The city of Philadelphia files suit immediately, January 22nd, and they move for what's called a preliminary injunction, and that's to get immediate relief. And it's because all of this is happening in a very time-sensitive moment, right before the summer, where there's going to be this celebration of the 250th anniversary of our country. And so the harm is immediate, and also the harm of the removal is irreparable. So they are able to move for a preliminary injunction. Shortly after that, the judge holds a hearing. Again, all of this is urgent, so the hearing happens quickly. And as you mentioned, Michael, we representing Avenging the Ancestors and Black Journey wrote an amicus brief as a friend of the court explaining the interests of both organizations, and then actually appeared at the hearing to make argument on behalf of both organizations as amici. The court then issued a decision. I recommend everyone reading it. You do not have to be a lawyer to read and understand this decision, or any decision for that matter, but this is particularly, I think, important in terms of understanding the implications for American democracy. She really breaks it down and even quotes from the book 1984, George Orwell, and describes what it means to have history erased and the harm to the public when history is erased. That order results in a preliminary injunction that said that the National Park Service needed to restore the exhibit. She initially says restore it forthwith, and then she gives a deadline of by the Friday of that week. So the National Park Service then starts to restore pieces of the exhibit. Essentially what gets restored is the illustrative panels that had artwork and themes from the exhibit as some of the material on them. So those get restored. At the same time, the Department of Interior National Park Service moves before the Third Circuit, the Court of Appeals, asks for a stay of the injunction. And then the deadline to restore the materials was that Friday at 5 p.m. That Friday afternoon, the Third Circuit issues a decision that essentially says status quo. So whatever has been restored doesn't have to be taken down, but nothing else has to be done to do additional restoration. And that's how we end up in this position in terms of what's on the ground, that if you go to the President's House Slavery Memorial exhibit today, you will see essentially a half restoration. The panels that were these illustrative glass panels have been restored. The metal panels still have not been restored. They are still in the basement of the National Constitution Center. And those are critical panels because they really talk about what the panels call the dirty business of the slave trade. So they talk about the history of the slave trade, the fact that 12.5 million African people were brought over through the slave trade. Not all lived, obviously, but we're talking about an impact of that magnitude. It talks about the slave trade and the longevity of slavery and Pennsylvania. This is important because people often underestimate the importance of slavery, especially in Philadelphia, but it talks about that history in detail. It talks about the Fugitive Slave Act in Philadelphia. So this is critical information that is still not restored, and it will be decided what the future of this is after the Third Circuit receives briefs, and after they issue a decision at the appellate level.
Again, I thank you for making this plain. In our final 2 or 3 minutes, Cara, if people want to know how quickly a resolution will take place, because everybody believes that, hey, this thing has got to be wrapped up by the anniversary of the birth of this country, the 250th. So they're going to have these big celebrations on July 4th, 2026. My question to you on behalf of the audience: what are the filing deadlines? What's the hearing schedule? Is this thing going to be resolved before July 4th? If you could look in your crystal ball and speculate, what would you say?
So I can't say exactly, but I will do my best. So at the Third Circuit, at the appellate level, the Department of Interior has filed its brief as appellants. At the end of the month, on April 27th, that's when briefs on behalf of the city and any amicus in support of the city are due. So that's when we will also file briefs on behalf of ATTACK and on behalf of Black Journey. And there are other organizations as well who will file amicus briefs, including those who did at the district court level, like the governor. And so after that, there will likely be argument. And then we know that the Third Circuit is moving faster than it normally does to make a decision. So obviously the hope is that the Third Circuit will issue a decision, in time for this summer. So that decision will be with regard to the preliminary injunction that I talked about. That's what's been decided so far and what is on appeal. Separately, a preliminary injunction is just that, it's preliminary relief. But the case on the merits is before the district court still. Including being able to issue a declaration, a declaratory judgment, and injunctions that are not preliminary, but that are long-lasting injunctions. And so those claims on behalf of Avenging the Ancestors and Black Journey, we filed to be a part of that suit on the merits. When the trial happens, assuming hopefully we get granted, our motion to intervene gets granted, it means that both organizations will be a full party in the trial going forward. And the district court will issue a decision on the merits. So that's all to say the courts are moving much faster than they normally do, understanding that this is a time-sensitive issue, but also we know federal courts move slowly. So I can't say exactly how long it's going to take. It's going to have to be a full, process of airing the issues.
But I think that makes things much clearer for the listening audience than they had before then. Cara, we've run out of time, but here's the thing. This show is called the TV Courtroom. As you know, better than most people, in many courtroom proceedings, it's a chance for a closing argument. Well, that chance is given to you now. So for the next 2 or 3 minutes, we are the jury. I'm the jury foreperson. We just started the 2-minute, 3-minute closing argument. What say you?
Well, again, we've heard the history of how the exhibit was developed. This was a process through which the city, the National Park Service, and Department of Interior developed an exhibit with input from the public. And to be clear, that's not an unusual process in the sense that part of what National Park Service and Department of Interior have recognized, and the statutes that create them recognize, is that it's important to have public input on understanding and recognizing our history as a country. And so the process that was followed was deliberative, it was detailed, and it really represented public citizens coming forward and taking part in determining what would be the historical record of our democracy. It's really a beautiful and in some ways remarkable moment to see democracy in action like that. And so the idea that now, despite the fact that Congress recognized that the purpose of this exhibit was to tell the history of slavery at the President's House, Slavery Memorial, the City Council recognized it, and National Park Service itself recognized that that was the purpose of this exhibit. Obviously, the city did as well. Everybody was in agreement. The idea that now just overnight, you could come in with crowbars and dismantle the entire purpose by removing the discussions of slavery from this exhibit surely flies in the face of statutory rights under the Administrative Procedure Act. But also, again, as we argue, the decision to target for removal discussions of slavery and Black history through this order makes clear that this is not really about removing examples of things that disparage or are divisive, but instead, really, again, kind of as we said in argument, taking a knife to a history book and removing discussions of Black history that are critical for us to remember, to ensure that this history isn't repeated, but also to understand how our country got to be the way it was today. So trying to deny this history and deny the history of slavery is really about perpetuating white supremacy. And so that's why we've brought both APA and equal protection arguments. And I think in terms of thinking about the harm of this removal, Michael, you could speak better to that than anybody, because I think back to how you described creating Avenging the Ancestors, right? And the importance of Black people being able to connect to their history and being able to have our history represented in the national record. To do otherwise is really to disparage the role that our ancestors played and to deny and erase us as people in this country. So again, we will be pushing forward on both fronts in the Third Circuit and the District Court, but really we are guided by what Avenging the Ancestors has done to really shine a light on truth in this country and the importance of telling the truth as a democracy.
Shining a light. That's exactly what you've done, Professor Cara McClellan, Esquire. We appreciate you. I checked the timer. We gave you 3 minutes. You got 2 minutes, 56 seconds, and you got it all in. And as the foreperson of the jury, we're going to give you whatever you asked for. So you won. I just wanted to lay that out. But thank you for the great work you do for the community. I'm speaking not only on behalf of ATTACK, but the Black Journey. And we're going to have our big meeting / town hall on Tuesday, April 6th. We hope you're there to repeat some of this information with an even wider audience. Thank you very much, Cara. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for all that you do.
My pleasure. Great stuff, folks, from Professor Cara McClellan. And you heard me talk about not only ATTACK, but you heard me talk about the Black Journey. Well, that's a perfect segue because we have a tour guide. In fact, one of the first tour guides for the Black Journey, and he's going to talk about what he does with Black Journey and also what he does as a new member of the ATTACK Steering Committee. None other than my new good friend, young Mr. Mijuel K. Johnson, who, as I pointed out, tour guide of the Black Journey, Reclaim Philadelphia leader, and a member of ATTACK Steering Committee. Mijuel, how are you today?
Hey, Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. And I got to tell you, Mijuel, I love the way you think. I'd like to say that great minds think alike. If I had thought about it, I would have said, Mijuel, can you go to the site and broadcast from the site? But I didn't think to ask you that. I didn't have to. That's what you've done. First, before you talk about where you are and why you're there, fill in the gaps. I mentioned that you're a tour guide. Talk about what you do as a tour guide, what exactly the Black Journey is, and any other introductory information you think you should share.
Yeah. Yes, everyone. Yes, my name is Mijuel, and I'm a tour guide for the Black Journey, Black Philadelphia, walking tours. The tour company was started by Raina Yancey Esquire. Esquire is an independent Black woman-owned company, and it began in 2019. Inspired by Raina's upbringing, whose mother was a park service ranger here, and so Raina largely grew up in these parks. Parks, seeing that the Black history hadn't always been told, and so the purpose of the Black Journey is to tell the full history of the United States and of Philadelphia, particularly its Black history, and the President's House Slave Memorial exhibit where I'm sitting now, is a key part of our tours. It's on 4 of the 5 tours that we give. And the only reason why it's not on on the fifth one, is because that one actually starts in Congo Square, Washington Square Park. But this particular exhibit, this exhibition mission is one of the core features of the Black Journey. And as a tour guide, this is one of my favorite places to give tours because it's so unexpected for many people to see that they're in the original White House, they're in where George Washington and John Adams lived, where you have one man who's an enslaver, George Washington, and another man who's an abolitionist, and this John Adams, as well as 9 enslaved people who lived in this very spot right here in Philadelphia, which is often spoken about in the context of its abolitionist history. But yes, slavery did indeed happen here as well. Well, I'm also a community activist with Reclaim Philadelphia as well, and involved with a number of organizations in the city too.
Folks, you're listening to and watching young Mr. Mijuel K. Johnson telling us about what he does and about what the Black journey is. And he mentioned in passing where he is. Mijuel, tell the audience where you are, but more important, why are you there? And why do you spend so much time there? Do you actually sleep there?
I am here at the president's house. I'm here today specifically to show that we are said that the fight does continue. We're here where part of the exhibit is back up, but not all of it. Not all of it. And so we're still fighting to make sure that the full story is told, and that this exhibit is, as you say, Michael, restored and enhanced. Going forward. I'm here because it's where I give the tours. This is where I give the tours. So I'm here frequently, and I promise I don't fade into the walls, and disappear and disappear here when needed. But yeah, these are stomping grounds.
You know, I joked about whether or not you live there, but maybe it wasn't a joke, because when we found out exactly what was going on with the actual desecration on January 22, 2026, you were there. Tell folks what you saw and how you felt.
Yes, I rushed over as soon as I heard about it. I was only a few blocks away, and as I arrived, I saw all the panels being taken down by park rangers. I videotaped it, seeing what was happening. Like, we were literally seeing fascism firsthand. We're literally seeing the history, an attempt at erasing history in favor of propaganda. And I mean, the people who were here, they literally said they would, they're just doing the job. They're doing what they were told to do. Classic excuses given in every regime. But this is, it made me feel angry, and honestly, like, we have been thinking that this was going to happen for a while. So it wasn't a surprise, but at the same time, it was a surprise to actually see this happening and going forward, and to see as Cara mentioned, the panel is actually being ripped down with crowbars. The metal ones screwed off, because they were able to be screwed off. But then people were like, actually, when I asked the question, when people ask the question, actually, like, why wasn't the rest of it taken down? It's like, because they literally didn't have the tools to do it, and that's just it. That's it. And like, I asked them where they were taking them in the flatbed truck. Ironically enough, there's a flatbed truck sitting right in front of me. They like, there wasn't in a truck. They're being taken to a secure facility. That's it. Now, of course, secure facility. That's saying everything and saying nothing.
Very well said. I love the way you make it plain and put people where you were at the time. Now, Mijuel, here's the thing. When I have guests like you on, like Cara, we always talk about the problem, but you have some proposed solutions. So I'd like you to share with the audience, what have you done to resist this fascism? And by the way, Mijuel, I wish you had whispered to me seeing fascism firsthand, because if you had whispered that to me, I'd have taken credit for that. I would have told people that I came up with that phrase, because if somebody says, "What did you see on that day?" When you said, "I was seeing fascism firsthand," that explains it all. And bottom line is, my job, I wish you had whispered to me first, and then I would have taken credit for coming up with that, because that's so graphic. Even the part about "I'm just following orders," that all flows in with that notion of seeing fascism firsthand. Having said that, fascism firsthand, the desecration firsthand, the vandalizing firsthand. Okay, my Jewel, that's the problem. What are you doing as a solution, and what do you encourage other people to do to join you in the solution?
The solution, the solutions we have here is like we're involved in fighting as part of the court, as part of the lawsuits news, and making sure that the story of this exhibit continues to be told, and that people know, so that people know that the fight's not over. Because we have a lot of people who are thinking like it's over, it's put back up, and like no, it's not. Oh, it's not. We're constantly reminding people, and sometimes that is why I'm here when I show up. If I feel like I'm nearby, like I'm gonna go by, and if people are coming past, like, hey, do you guys have any questions? Do you have any questions? And that this is what's going on. This is what's happening here, and what I'm trying to do is definitely bring in more people and more like-minded organizations. From people that I've spoken with, I know that they're all interested, and they all want to know what do we do going forward. But some said, how can we help? How can we help? And we've put together rallies and events, and there's going to be more and more to come. As we illustrate that the people are behind this memorial, because it's the people's history. So history, the people want this story to be fully told, because we have individuals who want us to love America, and of course we know that, and of course we do love America because we're here. But you can't fully love someone if you don't love them warts and all. And the U.S. has warts, and it has roses, and it has thorns. Thorns. It has all of these things combined, and the only way that we truly get to know our country, that we truly get to know ourselves, is by explaining the whole truth about ourselves. Both good, bad, and different. And talking about slavery, we have 50 million people in this country, 90% of which are the direct descendants of the enslaved people who were here. So we're talking about a very significant portion of our population. Directly and indirectly, everyone here. So there's no way you can possibly tell the full story of America without talking about slavery, and talking about it in every last detail possible.
Everyone who's listening and watching, you're listening and watching Mijuel K. Johnson, a tour guide with the Black Journey, a active member and leader of Reclaim Philadelphia. And I'm proud to say one of my comrades as a steering committee member of ATTAC, ATAC. In our final 2.5 minutes, Mijuel, I'd like you to do two things. One, answer the question, the people you've been speaking to since January 25, when you stopped by. One, are they receptive or antagonistic? And two, you'll have a final 1.5 to 2 minutes to tell us anything you think should be highlighted, repeated, or stated. So first, what type of reception are you getting from the people you encounter there? And two, any final words that the audience needs to know about?
The reception by people who are here, whether you're talking to just people stopping by the memorial, if you're talking to activists in the city, if you're talking to people who just hear about what's happened on TV, radio, whatever, it has been overwhelmingly in support of our cause. It is in support of our efforts. They want the story of the president's house and the story of America to be told. That's being told fully, and so they want this memorial to be completed. They want it to be restored, and as you say, Michael, they want it to be replicated elsewhere, so that we can make sure that our history is not a doctrine to be changed at the whim of an individual. It is the living, breathing history and fullness of all of us here, and we make no strides by lying to ourselves about ourselves. We don't lie to our own faces about our own faces. which is what we will be doing, which is what we would be doing if we were to say that everything is perfect and always has been perfect in America. The ideals that we are founded upon are perfect: liberty, equality, justice, humanity, but the reality of what we were founded on, on slavery, and institutional racism, genocide of Native Americans, and ethnic cleansing of Native Americans, that has not been, that is as true as the founding ideals, but it remains the ever-present task of each successive generation to make our professed ideals ever more manifestly real for ourselves and for our posterity. And we only do that by giving justice to our ancestors, by explaining that they did not fully have the freedoms that we enjoyed today, that we are seeing being rolled back. And while things are not perfect, we're not who we used to be. But at the same time, we're not entirely who we are supposed to be yet. And we have to keep building that more perfect union, and that the founders spoke about, that the founders entrusted us to do. Because even Ben Franklin knew. Ben Franklin said when he endorsed the Constitution that he didn't think the Constitution was the best, but he knew that it was the best that they could get, and future nations will do what they could with it.
You sound like the historian and tour guide and activist that you truly are. Final 10 seconds, Mijuel. If people want to reach out to you, if they want to follow you, if they want to contact you, final 10 seconds, how can they do that?
You can do so by following The Black Journey, Herney on social media. We have Instagram, Facebook, and formerly Twitter. Formerly Twitter, you can follow me personally. It's the same as the whole name, Mijuel K. Johnson. And Johnson, also on Instagram and Facebook. You can reach out to me via email, that's mkj751g@gmail.com. And of course, reach out to and follow the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition and the President's House Slave Room Memorial Coalition as well, as we go forward in this fight to make sure that truth and history are told, because the only way that you're going to have a full democracy is that we know our full history and our story, and that we make sure that our governance reflects us.
I'd love to say that the main reason that I wanted Mijuel on is for him to talk to us about what's going on at 6th and Market, and that's true. But the real reason for me is that I'm about to retire from all this stuff. I need a vibrant young man or woman to take over what I'm doing. So as you probably know, I'm handing the baton to Mijuel. So he'll be the face and leaders of groups like Attack, because he's probably about 20 years old, since I'm only 30 years old. So he'll be around much longer than me. Mijuel, thank you very much for what you do. And folks who want to know more about what Mijuel is doing, join him, me, and others at Attack's Zoom meeting taking place on Tuesday, April 6th. I'll provide that information in the final seconds of today's show. But Mijuel, thank you for what you're doing and for what you always do. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too, Michael.
Great stuff. In our final 30 seconds, folks, let me say this, and it was up on the screen. You must attend our next meeting, which will take place via Zoom only, Tuesday, April 7, 6:30 p.m. Tuesday, April 7, 6:30 p.m. In order for you to get the Zoom link, email us at atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com to get the Zoom link for the meeting taking place on Tuesday, April 7, 2026 at 6:30 p.m. You'll find out more about the new website we launched. You'll get more information about the legal developments. You'll get everything you need. I'm going to end today's show, like I end every show, first by thanking Roland for doing the great job he does as a producer and engineer. I want to end today's show, as I always do, by saying this: think Black, I'm out.